Now, Democracy Now! From the beginning, we have pioneered a way to send broadcast quality video through the internet because necessity is the mother invention. We couldn't afford the satellites. And also we did this with radio before we were doing television, sending the audio so that radio stations around the country and around the world could run the show. We now broadcast in over 1,100 stations. When the satellites went down, I remember seeing Anderson Cooper in his hotel room in a kind of, well, what Democracy Now! Used to look like, sort of fuzzy, Skypey way. And underneath the lower third said, reporting from an undisclosed location. And there was Sharif in the middle of Tahrir saying his name, saying where he was, saying it was the safest place to broadcast in all of Egypt. And so when the networks didn't have their satellites, there was Hani sending these 20, 25 minutes through the internet to Democracy Now! And we broadcast them the next day. And you met the people who were changing the world. And Sharif was then being interviewed on all the networks, on MSNBC and CNBC. He was being interviewed on CNN. And sometimes he would make time for Democracy Now! Only kidding, he did that every day. But we call this trickle-up journalism. And then we moved from Egypt to the Arab Spring to Wisconsin. I think the Arab Spring partly inspired Wisconsin. Okay, so did Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. He inspired it too. But you know what happened. Governor Walker comes to power. He is elected. His platform was never to do what he ended up doing. At least he didn't say it publicly. And he goes after the public unions. Gosh, in times of superstorms, don't we appreciate the public workers who spend night and day trying to save us? And there they were in Wisconsin, as Governor Walker was going after, I don't know, this T word, the new terrorist in this country now, teachers. Somehow they have become the target. How many of you cherish the teachers who partly raised you? I certainly do. How many teachers are in the audience? Well, it's an honor to be with all of you. And so he decided to go after the public unions and try to eviscerate their collective bargaining rights. And Wisconsin rose up. So we flew into Wisconsin because that's what we do. We cover grassroots movements. And we were in the state capitol building in Wisconsin when they had taken over. And I saw some of the biggest guys I've ever seen in my life, the Oshkosh prison guards. I went over to them and I said, excuse me, who did you vote for in the last election? And they said, Governor Walker, of course. So I said, so what are you doing here now? They said, protesting Governor Walker, of course. And I said, why? And they said, he didn't tell us he was going after our wives, the teachers, our neighbors, the nurses, our communities. And then I knew Governor Walker was in trouble when I was outside. 150,000 people. These are the largest protests Wisconsin has ever seen. In the freezing cold, and I see this older gentleman, white hair, silver glasses, marching in the snow with a sign that said, IRS auditors against Walker. And especially for young people here. If you think it was clear-cut decades ago, right? It was very black and white, you know, right and wrong, Dr. King is organizing, and it's so clear-cut, but that now it's a bit grayer. I think you should think again. There is a continuum. 1932, Wisconsin, AFSCME was formed. That's the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, the public unions. Oh, there was another organization that was formed in Wisconsin. It was the John Birch Society in Appleton, Wisconsin. And how many of you know what this organization is? Racist, segregationist, you know, fiercely fought. Dr. Martin Luther King fought integration. You know, it was co-founded by the father of Charles and David Koch, Fred Koch. Charles and David Koch were the oil and gas billionaire magnate funders of the Tea Party movement who promised to give more than $400 million in this election. In this first post-Citizens United election, where we won't know where so much of the money comes from. And that is very serious, where billions of dollars will be spent by the Democrats and the Republicans. And this is another issue that we have to deal with, and we deal with all the time on Democracy Now! Just a side story, just to finish the Koch thought. Before the Republican convention this year, the day before, I went to a talk by Michael Kranish, who's a Boston Globe reporter who wrote the biography of Mitt Romney. And he told this interesting story. In 1964, Mitt Romney's father, the popular Michigan governor, George Romney, who'd only been in office for 2 years, but many were trying to draft to run for president against Barry Goldwater, decided to go to the Republican convention. He despised what Goldwater represented because he despised his opposition to civil rights. Governor Romney brought his son, Mitt Romney, he was a high school student, to the convention. Ultimately, he decided not to run for president then. But he gave an address to the Republican Platform Committee where he warned the party against hate and extremism. He said, this is what will destroy this party. And he particularly singled out the John Birch Society. Mitt Romney was there. His father was modeling for him. And it is just an interesting historical note that today the sons of the co-founder of the John Birch Society are shaking hands with funding and supporting the son of the governor who warned against hate and extremism, and that son today running for president with the support of the Kochs. Just an interesting point. But let me go back to Wisconsin. AFSCME, born there in 1932. Dr. King, Dr. Martin Luther King, was assassinated April 4th, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. Do you know why he was there? He was there simply to march with the sanitation workers who were trying to organize Local 1707 of AFSCME. That's the continuum. And now let's continue with the movements. We move from Wisconsin to, well, I think the last 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, we have seen a rise of the immigrant rights movement like we have not seen before. At the Democratic convention this year, the first day, I was going into the convention. On the first day, they were about to gavel it open, and then I got a text on my phone, go to this corner now, something's about to happen. And it's often more interesting to be outside than in, so I thought I'd check it out, and went over to this corner. And this bus pulled up with butterflies all over it. It was called the UndocuBus. It had come from Phoenix, made its way to Charlotte, a great civil rights city, by the way. Remember 1960, the Greensboro lunch counter sit-ins of young people challenging segregated restaurants. They inspired in Charlotte the students at Johnson C. Smith Historically Black College to march on their lunch counters to integrate them. This is the richness of Charlotte. And I think that the immigrants' rights movement is the modern-day civil rights movement. So these people pulled up to this corner, and they got out real quickly. They're undocumented immigrants, inspired by, the last few years, the Dreamers. Those are the young undocumented immigrants who sat in on President Obama's campaign offices and other senators and Congress members demanding that the DREAM Act be passed. They were risking more than arrest. They were risking deportation to countries often they didn't know. Maybe they left when they were 6 months old or when they were a year old. Incredibly courageous. And this was humiliating to President Obama. I mean, he was a community organizer. He knew what they were demanding. You know, he understands Frederick Douglass's power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. And because of this bravery, he finally caved. He conceded a little before this summer. And he said, okay, we will allow undocumented immigrants 30 years old or younger who meet certain criteria to get a reprieve from deportation for at least 2 years where they can work or go to school in this country. Okay, they can't get health insurance, but they can work or go to school. And it was a tremendous victory for these young people. But they weren't going to stop there. They tasted victory. And they keep pushing for the DREAM Act to be passed and for a rational, compassionate immigration policy to be passed by both parties in this country.